The John Jorgensen Quintet. Thank you, gentlemen. I have your attention, please. I have a very important, extremely important announcement. Terry, please. You guys, Bob Frankston especially. Please listen. This is really important. If anybody stretches a wire across any aisle without taping it down, or sits in any aisle, or has any of their crap in any aisle, after we went out of our way to move extension cords into the middle of this room, if I see any wire or any crap or anybody sitting in any aisle, they're out of here. I mean it, because we had somebody trip and break their foot. And that's not acceptable. And I'm really upset. So please, please, please. Okay. Enough unpleasantness. Herman Wagter comes from the Netherlands, from Amsterdam, and that would make me a foreigner, so I don't think I'm qualified to introduce him. So I'm going to ask my friend Dirk van der Woude, who is Dutch, to come up and say a few words about Herman Wagter.
Well, actually I'm not Dutch, actually I'm Frisian, but well. Well, for instance, if you are a Basque from Spain and they call you a Spaniard, well, it's quite an offense. It's not that much in the Netherlands. Okay, Herman. I remember several years ago, I was introduced to a guy called Herman Wagter. And I was told this was the guy that was going to bring the cyber future to Amsterdam. We did have some kind of experimental project. And I spoke with him, and I thought, my God, this guy is really impatient. The first time he will speak to a city councillor, it will be a fuss. No, would not fit. So I came back to the others and I said, well, he's obviously very bright. He knows what he's talking about. He may have run businesses in Russia and Japan, whatever, and saved some businesses in the Netherlands, but can he function in the can of worms that the political organization, the city of Amsterdam, is like, where we have all this fuss with the national government, etc. Well, so I said, okay, eat some beef with him. I did. And I said, well, let's give it a try. We bunked together in a very small office for about, I think, half a year, Herman. We were still smoking both. So, well, all people said something is burning in that room. I think it did. Since that time, we were together. Several times I was a project leader, and when the project moved into something serious, he became the CEO. So now he is the CEO of the fiber company, has been doing this for the last 3 years, Herman, and I think he did something tremendous, and I think you learn that when you listen to him. So Herman, please.
Thank you, Dirk. I always get embarrassed with this kind of phrase. It's not in my nature to accept it, actually. But Dirk and I are buddies. We more or less Siamese twins. We are joined by the hip by email. We don't Twitter because it's only 160 characters, and usually we exchange megabytes by minute or day. So we're kind of a hive mind, and things go well this way. I've been thinking about what I can add to the discussion we're having over here, and what would be interesting with all these bright minds and knowledge in the room with the little project we've done. And I've tried to come up with something you might be interested in. And I got triggered by this statement of Dyson. And I like being a heretic, and if you are a young heretic, you immediately, of course, disagree with the old heretic at some points, but that doesn't matter. But I kind of thought, well, what's the origin of heresy? And the origin of heresy is a Greek word meaning to choose. So I think we have a heretic in charge sitting over there, so maybe this would be the new name of the conference in the future, because I think that we are all heretics in here, and I think heresy is a good thing as long as you dig deep to the source of things, and that's what I like to do. If you do so, you might upset some powers that be, and as the people in Lafayette know, and as we know very well, These first two stages are not easy. You can get stuck in there for a long time and it gets frustrating, and sometimes during these days I've heard the frustration over here also of the things in the States. But there is a third stage, Schopenhauer says, so in the end it will become self-evident. We always hope that you're part of the truth that comes. So I've put together 6 heresies of mine own, and I'm going to elaborate on that. The first one is that I think there's a natural desire of connectivity, and all these social constructs we have dampen or obscure the fact that these natural tendencies are there. The second part is that in discussions I always get mixed up that people are confusing technology with topology, which isn't necessary. The third lesson we learned is that if you reduce option values in infrastructure, that's penny wise, pound foolish. If you can afford it, don't. The fourth one is, maybe for you obvious, but some people not. If you share basic network infrastructure, it makes business sense and it attracts investments. The fifth one we've learned the hard way, that's deploying fiber in MDUs is incomparable to deploying fiber in suburbs, and I'll tell more about it. And the sixth part is latency is a cause and bandwidth is the effect, and not the other way around. But I'll take you through our little country first. Basically, it's a delta with a lot of mud, which means that we were even lower than Lafayette. A lot of the country is below sea level, and we need dikes. And some of this affects the nature of the Dutch, meaning that all this mud means we clean up a lot, and we are used to cleaning up. And secondly, the dikes makes people practical. Theory is great, but if it makes your feet wet, you switch over to practicalities, even if the theories don't fit. So if the feet don't get wet, screw the theory and get on with it. And that's a little bit the practicality of the Dutch, I think. This is Amsterdam, a city of about 1 million inhabitants with a lot of tenants. Very little people own their own homes. And in here we started something we call CityNet. But let me tell you a little bit about the characteristics of broadband and telecoms in the Netherlands. A lot of people have the ability to get cable, hybrid fiber coax, 90% of them. Why? Because about 30 years ago, municipalities started with rolling out cable networks, cable coax networks. And later on, because all FATs passed the ocean, and we had them too, they were sold off to private companies, most of them, not all. What do we get on it? It's RF video, baseband video, also digital video, internet and VoIP. 98% of the population can get twisted pair of relatively good copper. PSTN, internet and VoIP is provided, usually DSL currently. Again, like in Lafayette, a lot of the people in the Netherlands use analog baseband video because you can put three TV sets just in parallel and you have no problem at all. So that's sort of a standard utility. Competition, up till a point currently not on cable but on twisted pair, unbundled local loop is mandatory. So there are competitors who hire these unbundled local loops from the incumbent. What does it give us? These kind of numbers. This is about the cost you get. And of course there is now fiber, and that's a basic offer of fiber. Does it work? Yes. This speed test was done by my good friend Dirk. And of course he couldn't resist doing it with the speed test site of the competitor, the cable competitor, who is accidentally, if you see in the right, marketing itself now with fiber power. Apparently fiber is getting the norm. We got something else which is important in the Netherlands, and it makes that in all these offers you see for internet, you hardly see any bandwidth caps. And the reason is that we have an asset which is enormous, which is the Amsterdam Internet Exchange, based in Amsterdam. It's one of the biggest exchanges, if not the biggest exchange in the world, and you see over here some statistics. The interesting part, I think, is if you see the peak on the top, that's in daily usage, it's around 2,100 hours. So most of it is driven by consumers, not by businesses. The top level now peak is switching 660 gigabits per second, and that's all public peering and transit. All private peering is not even in the math that you see. The funny thing is, I think this is again something peculiar in an exchange if you look at theory. It's a very small organization, it's non-for-profit, it's foundation more or less owned by the big telcos and others. They don't make profit, they're not profit oriented. They have to supply as much connectivity with the lowest possible price. The value of it in terms of to the community of the Netherlands is enormous. At least $500 million directly in lower bandwidth costs, because over here you can buy the cheapest transit you can ever imagine because of the size of it. And I think that's kind of funny. There is also no law or no regulation regarding M6, regarding any exchange. And still it functions like a dream. So probably it doesn't fit into economic theories, but it works fine for us. And I hope that the fact that there is no law or no regulation for something like this stays for a very long period of time. If it would ever be out of service for 2 days, I think the economic damage to our country would be enormous. So if you think about it, it's amazing that something which is run by close to volunteers has such an impact, not regulated, and is working like a dream without having shareholder value driving it. What else do we got is an enormous amount of connectivity to the country. This is from teleography, and it tells in a specific form how much connectivity there is between countries. And the interesting part is that the Netherlands is 5th on the list. If you do it per capita, we are number 1. It just means that because we have mud and sand and the North Sea is shallow, it is easy to land fibers in the Netherlands. So we profit from it. The effect of all is that, again, high bandwidth in the Netherlands, especially in Amsterdam, is very, very cheap, which gives you an advantage. There are several projects running of getting used to that. So a lot of the economic value lies in Amsterdam, and so the City Council saw that and saw also the essential role of good infrastructure of being able to exploit this. And that's the reason why the idea was started. We have to get things moving in fiber to the home. And as you know, this was named CityNet to give without having much money, good visibility. And it was based on an idea that this need for connectivity is universal. And some time ago from Bro and others, I got an example out of Pakistan, I think. Pakistan, yes, and also Bangladesh, of what people do if there's no regulation. There are polls, and if you bribe the right person, which is not too hard, I think, you can get standard routers and fibers and UTP cables on the poles, and you build in the community your own network. They call it junk nets, and these junk nets are switched together with fiber uphaul, and over there you see a gray IX. There's nowhere on the statistics. What do people get? 100 megabits up and down to the switch. They have content delivery service, and people start to complain, usually get 30 megabit down. If they get less than 5 from the content delivery server, they complain. They pay about $6 a month. $8 a month for this service. And of course, it's in our terms, it's kind of crappy, because if it rains, probably it won't work too well. If you want to go to the big internet, it's very expensive and slow, because that's where the money is, that's what they cannot do. But the point that I'm trying to make is that for me is a proof that if anybody ever questions that people do want unadulterated connectivity, if they can get it, it's over here for all places in Pakistan and in Bangladesh. So if social contracts like law and regulation prevent you from doing so, it is obscuring the fact that it's a natural tendency. So there's a burden on society with law and regulation to fulfill that need. And that's the basis of what has driven us. Then you need to deploy, and unfortunately, unlike Japan or the US, we don't have poles. This is in the US. We don't have wooden houses. So there is a different arena in which to deploy fiber, which makes a lot of difference. The good thing is we have mud, which is easy. The bad thing is we don't have poles. How does it look like? Like this. Or like this. It's all Amsterdam, and you see these satellite dishes. These are immigrants from around the Mediterranean area who want to see TV at home. Big buildings. And it's all very clean. No poles. No wires outside. All utilities are there. This the second part in a big city is that we got 120 nationalities and very individualistic people. And what does it mean is that a lot of people do not know, are acquainted with, willing to talk to their neighbor. They have their own network. Sometimes in a given arena or area in a building, we have to make appointments, and they ask us to make an appointment with their neighbor because they don't want to meet. In a city, you don't meet others. You have your own friends. And of course, we have got young immigrants and others. That makes life interesting. But again, the easy part is we can dig, and we can put it down again. So we thought about it. Even with this relatively simple digging, it's quite disruptive in a city like Amsterdam to build utilities in the ground. People are complaining about that the road is open all the time. All utilities are underground. So we considered if we're going to build just the fiber, and we're only approaching the fiber, how do we do it in a way that's both sensible and neutral? And this is a business thinking around it. If you think as a city, and my favorite quote is from a city councillor who said, "We are here for eternity in 10 years. So a project which runs 20 years is normal, no problem. And building something which will last 30 or 50 years, of course." Which means that it was approached that if we say take a 30-year view in the future, how can we make sure that we don't have to dig again? Because this disruption of getting into homes, you don't want to do it again. So you want to have the highest possible utilization. And if you look back in technology, 15 years, and if you look where we are now and expect that the rate of technology will progress in 10 to 20 years as they go, you better hedge your bets. So we decided to go into a standard work, not knowing that a lot of consultants said that it wasn't possible. So we just did it, and this is how it looks. We have over 10,000 connections to point-to-point home run to a local switch house, 10,000 users for approximately 100 square meters, which is 1,100 square feet, I think, if I'm correct. In the POP, you have an optical distribution frame, and with patch cables, you go to the technology you want, with or without splitters. Because with the star home run topology, it doesn't matter if you use GPON or Active Ethernet or whatever. It's quite easy to put the splitters for PON inside the POP instead of outside in the road. It gives a bit better utilization of your ONT also. This is showing how it could be or how you could do it. Currently it's all Active Ethernet, but if the PON equipment will drop in price to make a differential, we expect providers to come with PON. But then you can mix, and you can mix on an individual basis by just doing the patching. To give you an idea, an optical distribution frame with 1,500 users and 1,500 fibers is something like this. And we need about 6 or 7, and that's about it. Also, the size of fibers coming in from the road. I've seen war stories or horror stories from consultants. They're just not true. We usually, in this particular case, we split it up in 4 banks to minimize the effect if something goes wrong, because there always is a chance that something will go wrong. We go into tubes with 96 fiber cables to make it possible to have multiple cable repair crews if there's something is going wrong. And the size of a single 4 bank of the size of a bank is something like this. That's all. That's all you need to get in 3,000 fibers. So the whole problem is not there. Don't believe people. Usually, when telcos came over, we had a lot of visitors, including our friends from Singapore. They usually with 10 people 7 times, and the effect is there. Usually went quiet and said, "This is all," because if you compare it with a copper plant, you usually are a factor of 4 smaller, both in cables and both in square meters that you need. This is the feed-in for 13,000 fibers. If it's finished, then this is made while constructing. The top feed-in is also filled like the bottom. That's all. Computer, floor, and you can manage all this. So we thought if we do it this way, we have an option value, a topology, which will allow multiple technologies in parallel. and evolution in technology as it goes. I don't care if it's PON, I don't care if it's Ethernet, I don't care if it's Lambda, coarse division multiplex, dense division multiplex. Whatever technology brings up, you can support it with it. The best possible fiber is a fiber that does nothing except guide light. On the other hand, you could do this, but then you save some fiber, but you're limited in your options. But we have mud, we can dig easily. We looked at, in the end, did we make the right decision? For us, this is the distribution of capex. You talk about in the passive arena only. Active is about 300 euros. This is about 900 euros, which is about $1,200 at the current rate. 10% is fiber, 10% is stuff, 80% is labor. Of the 80%, 50% is labor in the street, and 30% inside the building, getting from the front door of a multi-dwelling unit to each individual home. The funny thing is, if you go to suburbs, fiber goes up, labor inside goes down. Labor outside goes up. In general, the equation, how quick do you need to be? 10 minutes. I'll get there. For us, it's made a sound decision that it's not the fiber you have to skimp on, if you can dig. And this is how digging goes. Done in a day. And back. Pops, we find them in existing buildings, like this one. And end up like this. Then you have to, of course, connect homes or, as in Amsterdam, boats. And there are some boats who have to drive away or, float away every now and then. So after 1 year, we came up with finally the user detachable fiber, which means they have full radio, TV, IP internet, IP telephony on the boat, can disconnect the fiber, go away, come back after the weekend, connect again, and be up and running again. It works. Things get a little bit hairy if you have buildings like this, because usually architects do not consider anything but telco cables. You cannot use old ducts. It's a nightmare. One of the things that happens over here is that you need a lot of social engineering. We have changed the way the stuff is, the fiber is produced and mounted. Or rather, the vendors have changed it already 2 generations to support and adapt for this environment. One of the issues is the minimum time the front door needs to be open. Usually in a city like Amsterdam, there's a very expensive way of living. Both partners work, and they hate to be home for half a day. So if you can contract that to 1 hour or less, you have better chance that people are at home. Sometimes you need to go through all the apartments which are stacked to get a fiber to the top. What we ran into was somebody who was away because he had smuggled drugs and he's been in jail for 6 months, and we couldn't open the door on the first level. So 25 others had to wait 6 months. And no social engineering can help you with that. So it's incomparable, but for the same price. But you need to tackle it differently. We did it on a deployment basis, on a customer basis. So if the customer asked for it, we deployed it in the building. We all left that. We're going to do it in one time only. Everybody inside the building, because it doesn't pay off. Just do it all the time. Meanwhile, while we were busy with it, fighting also with legal battles, and of course you've seen it in the press, and I'm not going into that. We talked with all the people who are deploying fiber in the Netherlands, and we came to one standard for deploying passive fiber. So it's going to be interoperable in the Netherlands. All deployments are going to build to a certain standard, which means it's a big arena for players. At the same time, our big incumbent said we have to go to fiber to the home because we're losing too much in the competition with cable. And the most amazing thing is that they publicly say we have made lessons from unbundling DSL, that an open network is a smart business move. First of all, your utilization of your expensive infrastructure goes up, so cost per unit goes down. Secondly, if you have a rich ecosystem, you get a lot of people who, a lot of attraction to customers and ideas. And thirdly, you don't have to pay for the innovation. It's very difficult if you're a big company to innovate. Sometimes some things you cannot do because it goes against the grain, but you have a lot of players who invent things and do things. Hey, it's great. So they decided to go into a joint venture with the dominant player, Regifiber. Then the amazing part of my point of view is that the regulators responded quickly and wisely. They did two things. The joint venture is okay, provided you have to build an unbundled local loop, star network, home run, open access to COs, backhaul for competitors, non-discriminatory terms and prices. Secondly, the telecoms regulator, who can only set prices, said, we have a system where we will give you 20 years certainty for pricing, although we review it every 3 years. So you can talk with banks who are a little squeezy nowadays and get a reasonable return. It's based on a system of having a base level return, and currently a couple of % extra because there are risks, and they will review it every 3 years and lower the ceiling, but not lower than a given percentage. And it's so adjusted that there is a strong incentive for the joint venture to roll out to every rural area in the city, in the Netherlands. And I think that's amazing. So that has led also to a cooperation between all parties, which has been announced on the 4th of February, including Amsterdam, and now this is being implemented. So it makes sense. Last part, because otherwise I get into trouble in the time. Content, in my view, is something to communicate about. We always talk about bandwidth, but that's a content delivery mindset. And the content industry is worldwide less than the volume or revenue of text messaging, let alone all telecommunications. But we keep dominating ourselves with content. But we people are communicating, tweeting, whatever, and that's dominating the things we do. So we need a communication mindset. The thing I'm showing here is we tested it on the street. It's a Dutch invention, that you can have video conferencing. We'll see each other straight in the eye, not with the usual stuff with the webcam. Worked great. I tested it out on the street, and especially elderly people said, I like it, but. And after the fifth one said, can you play cards with it? I finally got the message. What it was saying is, can we do it with 4 people? Because I would like to have a presence around me, like I have with playing cards. Why don't you go out? Not after 7:30 in this city. I'm old. Your neighbors, I don't know them. They're always far away. So can I play cards? And if there's one killer app, I think that's going to be the one. Because if you can do that, you can have meetings. You can have chat with your children, everything else. And I think that will be dominant. Will take some time. For that, latency dominates. Human communication requires a response time of 200 milliseconds. If you do the math and postulate a 500 kilobyte packet going around, you need 100 megabit to get it to 0.2 milliseconds, 0.2 seconds. If you have lower bandwidth, the latency grows. So my point is, latency is the cause, bandwidth is the effect. It's not the other way around, which means that people will use the bandwidth or the pipe to get quick response, not to fill it all the time. Thank you. Any questions? Or not?
One question. Anybody? Bob Frankston,
Okay.
in the absence of, yeah, go.
Okay, I mean, a lot of this is very good apology, but it's similar to my concern with Lafayette. The question is, why can't you just say this is city infrastructure paid for out of general revenues, rather than having an ARPU model where we have to associate the use and payment with each subscriber or application?
Because we think it's, we looked at these models which are revenue shared based, and we just think they're too complex, and our regulator thinks the same way.
But I'm saying something much simpler. Just pay for it like the streets, where you just pay for it as a general infrastructure.
Okay, the battles we have been forced to fight against existing laws and regulations fed by lobbyists also.
Okay, I'd like to help you with that fight.
Okay. What's the main reason that you cannot do that?
Okay, thank you very much, Herman. And now we'd like to change things around a little bit. Kevin Werbach, who ably served on the Obama FCC transition team, and Dan Gilmore, who has been at the forefront of whatever the new journalism is, are going to talk to each other. And I'm delighted to be a fly on the wall for this conversation. Here's one mic. And there we go. Let's try to keep the total session to 35 minutes.
Okay. You'll wave us with.
I'll be in your face. Don't worry. Thank you. Go, gentlemen.
I'm not doing my email. I just tweeted to see if anyone had questions for Kevin, and I'm going to keep an eye on this.
Two can play at that game, my friend. Who's watching the tweeters?
There's something really evil about this. I'm not sure we should be.
Mine's K-Werb, K-W-E-R-B, Bob.
So we're just here to mainly to hear from Kevin, but to get a sense of how someone with really great history in telecom and also journalism and business and a lot of things, but as David pointed out, who was co-chair of the transition team for the FCC was co-chair with Susan Crawford, who I believe is here. She made a getaway before we could haul her up here to the stage. So I wanted to just start and say, so what do you do in a transition team? What happens?
Well, basically, you get to run a quasi-hostile takeover of a $14 trillion corporation called the United States government. And that's the fun part. The challenge is you have to do it with very few people, very, very little money, little infrastructure in some cases. In fact, in our case, very restricted access to the people you need to talk to. And you've got 77 days. Period, full stop. We tried to get them to push back inauguration, but somehow the administration just didn't want to do that. So in all seriousness, it's a tremendous challenge. Our task in the agency review process was to get an understanding of what was going on at the FCC, both at a substantive and a process level, really deeply go into the agency, talk to whoever we could talk with, which again was somewhat limited by forces beyond our control in this case. And be able to tell both the new leadership team coming in as well as the people, for example, doing the personnel, as well as the people thinking about some of the strategic policy cuts, what are the issues, what are the challenges, and potentially what are some options to think about going forward.
Okay, so you said part of this was to find out what was going on at the FCC. So what was going on at the FCC?
Well, there's no one answer to that. And there's people here I see that are at the commission that are here in the audience. It's no great secret. Kevin Martin, who was the chairman, under the tail end of the Bush administration, ran the agency in a particular way, which was very closed and very politicized, and in particular was very distrustful, I think, of the staff and unwilling to allow people at the FCC to really do their jobs fully to support their work for the American people. And we knew that there was a House investigative report that came out as it happened while the transition was going on. But just to really get a sense of what was broken in the agency was a lot of what we were doing.
Can you get more specific about what's broken and what the fixes are?
Yes and no. There's some things I just can't talk about. The details of what exactly we discussed there. I can't talk about.
Just a few friends here.
Yeah. Well, if you all no one's blogging this, are they? Right? You guys, can you just stop, Brett? No. No. Seriously, there are some things that were problems created or perpetuated by Chairman Martin. There are some things that were that have been problems at the FCC for a long time, basically, Chairman Martin, I think, accentuated the siloing of the agency, where people couldn't communicate across their bureaus. There was a hostility to new ideas coming up from the bottom. And that's incredibly pernicious if you want to make good decisions. As I said, he tended to have a very top-down, I think, overly political approach to things. That wasn't really sensitive to the kind of dramatic changes that are happening. So there's a bunch of legal and structural and formal things which probably are not as interesting to this audience, but there have been lots of discussions about how to reform the agency. The big issue is, look, the world is changing around us. I mean, this is the Federal Communications Commission. It deals with all the industries that this conference is about, and you have to be blind to not think that there's just titanic change happening. And I don't think the FCC, what's broken about it is that it was set up in a previous era, and it's developed a set of practices and norms that are not adapted to the era we're in now. Now, as an aside, that's not unique to the FCC. I mean, that's true about most of the companies in the private sector in this area as well. But the FCC should be at the forefront of changing.
Okay, a parallel universe has just been declared, and you are now chairman of the FCC. What are the first three things you do of substance?
Of course, if I told you what I would really do, that would ensure that I never will be chairman of the FCC. Because
we hear some ambition here.
No. I mean, the answer would be something like first kill the telecom industry, then kill the broadcasters, and then kill the newspapers.
You don't have to do the last of those.
No, I'm being facetious, but to make a point, which is the one I was trying to make before. If I were chair of the FCC, and I'll say as a plug that the guy who's going to be the chairman, Julius Janikowski, is an extraordinary person and really brings tremendous skills and knowledge to the job, which I think will serve the agency extremely well. But I think it's important to try to skate to where the puck is, where the puck's going, as opposed to getting caught up in the trees, getting caught up in what's going on right now. There are extremely important decisions that have to get made in the short term, the stimulus package, network neutrality, and so on and so forth, media ownership. Those all have to be done. They have to be done well, but the real opportunity for the FCC is to try and get ahead of the curve. So what's this world going to look like in 20 years? To take one example, think about spectrum. Think about, I mean, this is the device of today. What kind of wireless capacity is the iPhone of 2020 or 2030 going to require? I strongly suspect it's a wireless capacity that we can't get to with our existing spectrum regime, with the idea that we allocate spectrum and define frequency bands. We're only going to be able to serve the need of that kind of device in a world where devices look at the spectrum as a pool of capacity that they can access adaptively. This is not, I mean, there's bits and pieces of this today. I'm not saying the FCC should mandate this today, but it should have a view as to where things are going and aim for that, because otherwise there'll be a constant series of short-term adaptations and we'll miss the big picture.
Okay, that actually raises, you touched on something that Doc Searles asked that I bring up with you, and that is the future for getting a lot more open spectrum. And what's your sense of whether we're going to get to that place or not, based on current people who will make some of these decisions, including, of course, Congress?
And I'm just noticing. See, I was looking up here to read the chat, and now I see it's down here too. And David, we should talk about World of Warcraft, but open spectrum. I think there's a real openness to the idea. So it's hard to talk in the short term. The FCC under Chairman Powell, frankly, did some really innovative things on spectrum policy. They set up a task force. They started the white space proceeding. They did ultra wideband. The FCC was really ahead of any other telecoms regulator in the world in terms of the creativity, both with which it was actually implementing reforms in spectrum policy. And the creativity with which it was energizing the staff as well as the private sector to develop new ideas and new models. And that largely got shut down. So I think there's going to be a willingness, an openness to exploring some of those ideas. Julius hasn't even been confirmed yet, and so it's hard to make short-term predictions. But as I said, we're going to have to get there. I mean, it's just the industry and government is going to increasingly come back and say we need more capacity, and you just can't get there from here.
So how real is this change then? We go through at different administrations where things get sort of started and then get put on the shelf again. Do you believe that we're going to see actual substantive deep change in this administration, or will it be the kind of change that can be put on the back burner the way it has in the past?
Absolutely. I think there's going to be tremendous change, but that doesn't mean that it's guaranteed, and that doesn't mean that people in the community on the outside shouldn't keep pushing the administration to do better. No, it really matters who wins the election, and we saw that very clearly in the transition. Going into that transition office the first week right after the election in November, and just sitting in a little teeny, bare office and looking at the hallway and seeing who was going to walk by next, it was just amazing, because it was this extraordinary collection of brain power and of people who were really thoughtful, and people who really hadn't been directly plugged into the process the past 8 years. Now, of course, that's just a tiny subset of the great community of people who can and should be plugged into this process, and the real challenge for people in government and the administration will be how to get great ideas in from all over the outside. But there's no question, and there was a great sense of mission among the people I worked with on the transition, including people like Susan Crawford and Larry Strickling and Julius Janikowski and others who are going into the administration, and they really are going to work their butts off to do the right thing for the country. Now, again, hold them honest, keep them honest, but also it's really essential that people devote energy to figuring out how to help them. Because having been in government, there's a tunnel vision that comes about. No matter how smart you are, no matter how well-meaning you are, it's really hard to see beyond the kind of fog of the Beltway. And people like Susan are going to need a great deal of help in doing that.
I want to throw it open quickly to you folks, but let me just ask one more myself, which is, what would be a couple of things that could be done in the reasonably near future that would be difficult, if not impossible, to reverse by people who would like to not see things go the way you're talking about? So what are some fundamental things that even if the worst happens from your perspective and the wrong team gets in next time, that they can't turn back the clock? What are some specifics?
See, I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I mean, successes are difficult, if not impossible, to reverse, and so that's sort of how it comes about. The goal is not to think strategically about how to create landmines for the next guys. I mean, that's frankly what we ran into from the previous team in some cases that we were trying to overcome. And frankly, this is not just about Democrats versus Republicans. There were honestly some terrific public servants in the Bush administration, and there were a whole lot of terrific non-political people at places like the FCC all the way through. We're going to need the whole country and not just 52% of the country to solve these kinds of challenges. But just to get back to the question. It's things that have real take up and usage. If it's just a committee of people at the FCC inside that building in Southwest Washington, then the new leader of the agency can change it. But if it's something that has a real deep rooting in the community as well as in the industry. I mean, I was being facetious before about killing the telcos and so forth, not because I want to see those companies die because I don't like them. But because I think they understand they all need to evolve to something new as well. So it's finding solutions that ultimately gain the support of a lot of the different players, so that it's not just something that happens because one person at the FCC says make it so.
Can I have a vote? How many people would like to see the telcos die partly because we don't like them? Okay. Why don't we just jump in here to some questions?
Okay. My name's Glenn Strawn, and for the last 15 years I've been working overseas trying to inculcate regulatory reform in Eastern Europe, Africa, Central America. And it's an irony because I'm working for USAID. They're paying me to do this. We're going to governments telling them they need to open up their telecommunications sector. And in Eastern Europe, it's a requirement to be in the EU. So in Macedonia and Montenegro, we had success. We defeated the monopoly. We opened them up. I sent people to the FCC for training, USTTI training. And it's just, I mean, it's great to hear what you're saying now. I always felt the irony of sending people over, citing the FCC as this great mecca for how things should be. And so I'm really encouraged by the changes that you're talking about.
Hypocrites, us? I mean, please.
I'm sorry?
We're hypocrites, Americans? Never.
Well, I was. So
I should put that in
US
brackets
money.
with.
Right. So.
No, and I completely agree. The other thing, though, is what your comment highlights. It's thinking globally about things, and we're not just in a silo. And we've had just at this conference lots of great examples from outside the U.S., including the last speaker. The FCC plays a role globally, but other parts of the administration do well, and there are a number of pieces of this puzzle, and quite frankly, we've quickly gone from an environment where there were. The White House didn't care much about technology and communications policy, quite frankly, under the Bush administration, and there were only a few places that were high up in the government that were actively, aggressively working on these issues. We've gone from that to just an embarrassment of riches. So you've got the FCC. You've got NTIA within the Commerce Department, which has a role dealing with federal spectrum issues, as well as the lead agency on the broadband stimulus grant program, as well as digital television. You've got the Rural Utility Service, the Department of Agriculture, where Jonathan Adelstein is going over to from the FCC. You've got the State Department, where soon someone will be named in a position to lead U.S. communications policy issues for state. And in the White House, you've got the National Economic Council, and you've got the Office of Science and Technology Policy, all of which have just fantastic people at them who really get this stuff. So there's going to be a lot of activity here, but also a lot of activity opening up and engaging with the rest of the world on these issues.
Over here, please.
That Harold felt that's so amazingly set up for the question I wanted to ask, actually, and in two. One is NTIA and particularly government spectrum, and they've one of the only thing the Bush folks really did was to set up this sort of committee. They produced a report on the federal spectrum, but obviously there's a lot of interest from all both the licensed carriers and the folks who would like to see more open spectrum in federal spectrum. And I think some of on the Hill as well. What do you see as kind of the next steps and with a focus on NTIA rather than the FCC, about where things are likely to go with federal spectrum. What do you think is achievable in this administration?
Well, again, it's a little hard to predict because the permanent head of NTIA has just been nominated, and he's still staffing up his team. But step one is coordinate who's doing what. So there's traditionally been a lot of conflict and confusion between NTIA and the FCC, and the electrons don't know if they're a federal frequency or a private frequency. Just as they also don't know if they're in the U.S. or somewhere else, as the light just propagates indefinitely. We need to know how spectrum is being used, and you alluded to the congressional bill that's pending. Step one is do an inventory. Steps to figure out just how all the spectrum is actually being used. We just don't know, and that shouldn't just be a federal inventory. It should look at the spectrum as a whole, which requires, I think, some division of labor between the two agencies. Step two is build a set of systems to do something with that inventory. And that the FCC has an opening to do because of the TV white spaces proceeding, which I know you know about extremely well, where the FCC authorized unlicensed devices to operate in the white space around broadcast frequencies, but required a database so that the devices could, in real time, sense and check with the database if there was a broadcaster or someone else who had a license in that particular area on that particular band. I think this is a tremendous opportunity to build the foundations for the next iteration of spectrum, for some of the future things I was talking about. It shouldn't just be a white space database, and ultimately it shouldn't just be a private database. It has to cross over with the federal spectrum. So, and Dan is shushing me, but there's a lot more that could happen on that. Raising the visibility of it is important because there are lots of agencies, DoD agencies, the FAA, Energy, and so forth, that have spectrum, and they're frankly trying to figure this out themselves as well. And if they see that there's a boulder rolling down the hill, and this administration wants to unlock the potential in that spectrum, frankly, also to benefit those agencies, then they're going to get out of the way, or they're going to try and get behind the boulder as opposed to trying to resist.
Yeah, the past administration seemed to have successfully turned back the clock with the help of AT&T, not only in remonopolizing the country, but also reverticalizing the industry. And the tying of particular cell phone devices to services is a case in point. And is it your purview or interest to look into, again, specifically AT&T and the iPhone versus the Carter phone decision some time ago, and using that to open up the wireless system to the device we want?
Well, so in terms of my purview, I have no formal job. If that wasn't clear, I was part of the transition team. The transition ended at inauguration. I still am blessed with many great friends who have gone into government. But I'm a professor right now, so I'm not responsible for any of this. That being said, clearly there's an important issue around open access on the wireless platform. I was frankly really surprised by how fast things changed over the last 2 years or so, from the point where all the operators said, no, we have to vertically integrate. We can't have we need to control the apps that are on the device and the business model and so forth, and not have any flexibility there, to the point where pretty much all the major players are talking about some kind of open access. Now, query what that means. Verizon has an open development platform announcement. Apple has the App Store. I completely agree. It's not the kind of open access you're talking about, but we're a heck of a lot closer in that direction than I thought we would be at this point, just from the dynamics of the market. So the question for the FCC is, can you shine a light on what's going on and have the discussion, have a platform to figure out both the business dynamics as well as the policy issues about what that really means? Because there are, there's some legitimate issues on both sides. But, as opposed to saying, well, do we mandate some particular kind of wireless Carter phone? That's one option, but let's create an environment to really look at what's happening and where things are going.
Well, I have a couple questions, but first of all, I'd like to ask you, Kevin, if you could start
blogging again so that we can get some insight into some of the things that you're thinking about, because I've always enjoyed reading your blog.
Thanks. I would love to. It takes so damn much time that like a lot of people, I've sort of sloughed into tweeting instead.
Oh.
But
World of Warcraft, right, which takes no time at all.
Okay. Okay. Maybe shorter blogs. Actually, apropos to what you, I have a couple questions, and it turns out that they're really apropos to what you just referenced. One of the things in reference to Harold's question about spectrum, but I'd like to ask you to just give us your opinions more broadly. You ticked off, the FCC, NTIA, half a dozen military agencies that all have pieces of spectrum and pieces of spectrum policy. Do you think it's time that the United States have a agency, perhaps even a cabinet-level agency, that captures all of these policies into a single body? The second part of my question is one of my specialties is comparative law and international telecom regulation. The fact is that when Europe or Canada calls the United States, they don't know who to talk to about this or that spectrum or broadcast or internet policy, because all kinds of different agencies have pieces of it. So I'd just like to hear what your thoughts are on those questions.
We could spend a huge amount of time and money and energy squashing boxes and getting the organization right, to the point where that would expend all the political capital and everyone's energy and not actually do anything. Thankfully, we have this thing now called the Internet. And this stuff called social media tools that can substitute for changing the formal boundaries of organizations. So again, what I'm talking about in terms of databases and so forth, they don't require one entity to be the spectrum policy agency. They require a bunch of tools and online new media infrastructure, which by the way, the Obama administration, both at the centralized level in the White House and at a decentralized level in various agencies is really going to push towards. And they require leadership. Some of that will come from the president himself, but some of that will come from the heads of the agencies and other places. Again, at some point, if you have people who are in positions of leadership in the government step up and say, this will not do. I mean, we have one United States government, and we can't all be fighting with each other in ways that, again, hurt the actual federal spectrum users as much as they hurt everyone else.
Do you have a follow-up there?
It's a separate question. It relates to the speakers this morning talking about the smart grids and the fact that there's a growing conflict, say, between the telecom companies and the utility companies, and also how getting the utility companies to agree on standards for these devices is somewhat akin to herding cats. What's going on, again, just at the government level between the FCC, potentially other regulatory bodies in trying to define these new boundaries or setting some unified standards so that these smart grids and the smart meters can actually work?
So I don't know specifically in that area what's going on now, but it's critically important. And I have a law review article that's coming out later this year that basically makes the point that standards are a form of regulation, and in fact they're an increasingly central form of regulation. And so regulators need to think of themselves as standards bodies, and that doesn't necessarily mean always setting the standard, because sometimes things can develop through industry bodies. Sometimes there's value in having different competing standards. But again, to look at what's going on and see where there's a need for a push. You don't want to push too fast and too much top down and get to the wrong standard. But if the lack of standardization is an impediment, if that's what's stopping the growth that needs to happen, then that is definitely a role for government.
That looks like a cue that we're finished.
So I wanted to ask Dan a question.
Yeah, well, I think that turnabout is fair play.
So what would you do if you were chairman of the FCC?
Well, to quote someone else, resign. I don't know. I liked your list. I think it would be a good idea to be moving toward thinking about not having these behemoth companies controlling our spectrum and lines the way Steve Jobs used to call them orifices until he got in bed with one. That's a really bad metaphor. Sorry.
You're really not going to be chair of the FCC if you're talking like that.
I'm glad that the streaming is broken. But, obviously this is just not working. And
The FCC.
Which commissioner? And we have so many issues here. We never even talked about net neutrality, which is a whole area that has been thoroughly dealt with by other folks here. But I got to say, from my perspective in believing in the future of news as coming from both not the bottom up but the edge in, that if we don't have something that assures, I don't mean strict, utter, total neutrality of all bits and all times, but something that assures that people don't control precisely which ones get delivered in which order at what speed, if they get delivered at all, then we're really in trouble for the future of journalism and for the future of a democratic society.
Yeah, and that's a really important area to highlight as well. I mean, I am stealing this from someone I saw on Twitter, I think, but I mean, we really don't need newspapers, but we need journalism as a society, and there's a lot that the FCC could do in that area. Some of it is regulatory, and some of it is just being the world's greatest think tank and conversation starter in thinking about what is the communications infrastructure that a society needs in the 21st century, and just be a platform to think about that. Again, as I said, getting ahead of what's happening right now, even though they're going to have to deal with the messy stuff of all the consolidation and all the ownership.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Fascinating conversation. Now I'd like to introduce a fellow, he's European, except you wouldn't know it. He's French, but you would not know it by talking to him. No, I don't, really. He's a blogger. He has a blog called Fib-E-Revolution. Fib-Er-Evolution. Oh, it's Fiber Revolution. Fiber Revolution. And he also has another blog about harmonicas and harmonica players and harmonica music. In other words, he values both of the families of communications technology that we honor here at Freedom to Connect. And he is actually going to tell us about one and then perform the other. So Benoit Felton, come on up here and tell us what's going on in Europe.
I'll take one of these. Okay, now how to get a Mac to work.
What do you need?
My presentation.
Oh, yeah, jeez. Okay. Oh, it's already open? Okay. Let's see. Window. No, that's Finder here. PowerPoint.
Escape.
Yeah.
I knew that.
This one.
Yeah, I knew that. I
okay.
knew that, of course.
And then slideshow view.
Okay. Okay. So indeed, I am French, and it's important for you to understand that a lot of what I'm going to say now is very tainted by my Frenchness. And I'm sorry, I won't take questions about why my accent isn't French. Okay. Too long to explain. Okay, let's be fair. There's been a bit of contention between our two countries in these last few years. I'm sure it's all over now, and I just wanted to stress that point as an entry point to the discussion here. I mean, let's do a bit of comparison, right? You had George Washington. We had Lafayette. They worked great together. You had, or you have, freedom fries. Oh, sorry. How did that get in there? French fries. And we have French fries, okay, of sorts. Yes, they are French fries, indeed. You had a great comedic genius of a president. We have a great comedic genius of a president. You now have a tall and handsome president. We have a tall and handsome president, too. But none of that is why I'm here today. I'm here today because, to varying degrees, we have fiber in both of these countries. And I wanted to give you a perspective of what's happening in the fiber world in Europe. And maybe, if I can be so bold, as to suggest a number of ways in which this might inspire U.S. policy. So I'm just going to very quickly give you an overview of what's happening in Europe, then draw a number of conclusions based on the research that I do at Yankee Group on this topic, and look at how this might be applicable to the U.S. So very quickly, and I took out a lot of the countries where not a lot is happening here. I have another version of this slide which is extremely busy. I'm just going to go through the top 10 countries of fiber in Europe. Sweden is the most important fiber country in Europe. There's about 900,000 homes passed and 400,000 subscribers. What's interesting in Sweden is that there's over 200 municipal networks there, and to a large extent, the fiber deployment started with the municipal networks, even though the private players are now actively deploying. What's also interesting is that these municipal networks sparked a form of open access model, which has really created a lot of dynamics in the service provider space. So there's over 450 registered service providers over broadband in Sweden right now. To be fair, I'm not sure that will still be the case in a couple of years. I suspect there's going to be some consolidation. But there's also going to be some differentiation. So if there's one country in the world where I expect to see the next generation of services emerge, it's Sweden. Norway is a small country and comparatively quite advanced as well. 275,000 homes passed, 180,000 subscribers. It's mostly vertically integrated utility networks. And actually, it's starting to really hurt the incumbent. So after years of not deploying fiber, the incumbent has now started to do so. Finland, 420,000 homes passed, only 50,000 subscribers. And in fact, it's only really started to pick up when the incumbent has started to deploy. Denmark's an interesting situation. The fiber deployment in Denmark is quite extensive, and it comes mostly from the utility companies, 620,000 homes passed. But it's not very successful commercially, and the main reason for that is that their incentive to deploy fiber is burying the power cables. And so there's no coherent network deployment because the driver is not the energy network, the communication network, it's the energy network. And so marketing a non-coherent network is very complicated. The Netherlands, I won't spend too much time on. Herman talked about it already. What's really interesting in the Netherlands, and I'm going to come back to that, is that the incumbent has willfully embraced open access. France, 4,500,000 homes passed, but only 180,000 subscribers. That's partly due to the fact that a lot of these homes are passed by the cable operator, but the cable operator is dogged with his history of bad service, so they're actually not acquiring customers even though they've deployed the infrastructure. Part of the issue is that the fiber deployers themselves, and the 3 private operators deploying fiber in France, are all fighting on how to connect the inside of the building, and so there's a regulatory blocking point there that really slows down the adoption. Spain's an interesting case because it's the only case I know in Europe of an incumbent that faces no real competition and has announced that they would deploy fiber nonetheless. they actually got a very comfortable regulatory holiday from the regulator, who said, if it's service above 30 megabyte, you don't have to have competition there. That's nice. And despite that, you know, depending on which week you talk to them, they're deploying or they're not deploying. So interesting case. Portugal is in many ways similar to France, except that one of the things they did back in 2005 was very strictly enforce duct access rules. The incumbent not only has to offer duct access, but they actually have to make sure there's space in the ducts. And if they don't, they face very serious fines. And that has prompted competitive operator Sone to actually start deploying fiber. And it's pretty clear now that Portugal Telecom is going to follow one way or another. And finally, Germany is the big country where you might expect a lot to happen, but actually, apart from a number of municipal networks, not a lot is happening. Most interesting project is Net Cologne, which is actually a project that started in DSL. And in Cologne, the incumbent has a very low minority share of the market. And then finally, the two small countries that are very dynamic are Slovakia, where incumbent Orange is rolling out, and now competitor Deutsche Telekom is rolling out as well. And Slovenia, where incumbent Telekom Slovenia and competitor T2 are both deploying as well. So that just gives you an overview of what's happening. And I have to say this, that very clearly it is a nascent market. There's still a lot of things that need to happen for this market to gain scale. But what's interesting is all of this virtually happened in the last couple of years. So, in fact, if you look at the FTTH Council statistics, Europe is clearly lagging behind Asia and North America in terms of actual deployments. But the growth in Europe is much, much stronger than in these two areas. Now, compared to Asia, that's not very difficult because their growth is, in terms of homes passed, is slowing down, of course. I'm going to skip the next few slides in the interest of time, although this one is interesting. The point I want to get to is in terms of lessons is there's regulation, and there's also private players addressing a new market. And I don't think a lot of them realize this at this point. But a number of them do, and that means that it has allowed them to approach this in a very different way and frame the regulatory agenda. The two examples in point are KPN, which we've talked about already. KPN, when they decided that fiber to the home was the way to go, turned to the regulator and said, I will unbundle. You don't have to convince me of it. It's in my interest. I will unbundle. And I don't know how Opto reacted internally, and they're not saying. But what I find interesting is that as a regulator, that actually puts you in a negotiating position as opposed to an enforcing position. And I think KPN got a lot out of that. And Swisscom is doing the same to a certain extent in Switzerland. What Swisscom realized is that in between the existing cable operators and the municipal networks that were being deployed in Switzerland, their network was never going to reach 100% of the country. So if they want to provide services to everyone in the country, they need to have access to whatever fiber is in there. And so what they did is to say, we're going to deploy, and wherever we deploy, we will deploy 4 fibers to every home, so that up to 3 competitors can come and pick that extra fiber and serve our customers. But we want opposing parties to have to do the same. And that's now where the negotiation is with the incumbent. Okay, so lessons. I've looked into this market for 3 years now in quite some depth, and maybe some of you have seen this slide already. Bruff here has kindly blogged it. What I tried to do is to build a theoretical greenfield fiber deployment business model and try to see what this can teach us. You see here on the horizontal axis the take-up. That's the proportion of homes passed that's actually subscribed to a fiber service. On the other horizontal axis, you see ARPU, which is the revenues that this generates per subscriber. And on the vertical axis, you see how long it takes you to pay back for the investment. And this this model is a very high-level model, and I'm sure it could be refined in a great level of depth. But I think the lessons that it gives are fairly explicit, even at this level. This assumes that it costs you €1,000 per home to connect each home, and I'm sorry I'm speaking in euros, but maybe that will be the next international currency anyway. And it assumes that you're making 45% gross margin on that product. So what does this show us? The first thing it shows us is that it's virtually impossible for payback to be less than 10 years unless you reach at least 40% penetration. For your information, Verizon Fios 18% take up right now. Okay? So I'm not saying, I haven't looked into their economics in detail, but what I'm saying is, if you want this as a private player, if you want this to be a relatively short-term payback project, you have to get really high take-up. And if you're a large-scale player, what's the best possible way to get high take-up? To have competing operators on the infrastructure. Because suddenly, instead of having one guy marketing and selling services, you have 4 guys marketing and selling services. You have 4 guys, 4 times the amount of advertising, 4 times the amount of sales force in the field, and that is what's going to drive take-up. And the good thing about that dynamic is that there's actually a prize at the end for the incumbent. And that prize is that if you reach that 100% mark, you can disconnect your copper. And that's what costs you a whole lot of money. But obviously, you can't do that if you don't reach 100%, right? So looking into this, I started thinking, well, wait a minute. Why are these guys refusing open access? Why are they saying that if they're going to deploy, they have to be vertically integrated and you can't enforce open access, it would destroy the economics? To me, this tends to suggest exactly the opposite, actually. If you want to make it work, open access is in your interest. And I'm still, I've gotten some responses on this, some positive, some negative. There are clearly a number of incumbents when you talk to them about this. At best, you get blank stares. But what I find interesting as of yet is that I haven't had an economic response that says, no, you're wrong and this is why you're wrong. So I'm not saying I'm absolutely right. This model can and should be refined, and if anyone wants to finance that, you're more than welcome. But so far, I'm still waiting for the one answer that will say, hey, this is completely wrong. So I think that's an important lesson. And if you listen to KPN, I think this is clearly what they have understood. Okay, I'll skip this quickly, but basically what KPN's CEO was saying a few weeks back was, we were stupid in refusing unbundling 10 years ago. It was in our interest and we didn't see it. So open access. I mean, open access can mean virtually anything. Everyone has his definition of open access, and in fact, a lot of incumbents are saying we are open access because you can access the internet and that's open. So, okay, everybody's open access. If you open ducts, what's going to happen on the market? If you open only ducts, okay? If you open only ducts, you're going to get monopolies virtually everywhere, and you might get oligopolies in very dense urban areas where it might be profitable for more than one player to deploy a network. If you open the dark fiber, you're going to get oligopoly more or less everywhere, but it's still a pretty high investment market to get into. If you open the lit fiber, bitstream, you're going to get more service providers, probably in the tens, or in a market as big as the US, maybe in the hundreds. But there are questions about the economy of bitstream, and so far, bitstream economics everywhere in the world haven't been very successful. I still haven't determined if that's because of bitstream as a technological access solution or because of pricing issues. And finally, this, internet is open, therefore we are open access. Well, if you're in a purely net neutrality stance, that's true to a certain extent. And, Google is now providing voice services, so that could hold true, but you have to ensure that it's net neutral. If we're going to make the deployment of fiber work for private players, and here, I'm taking the stance that forget the public money for a minute, and how do we make the private player economics work? These are the three wholesale models, well, the two wholesale models that exist today, okay? If you're vertically integrated, there's no wholesale model. Then you have unbundling and you have bitstream. The issue with these two wholesale models is that for each customer, you have one service provider. And I think that's, in the long term, that's value destructive, because even though all the players in the market today offer the same services, we can all foresee that this infrastructure will allow a slew of new and different services to come onto the market. And if you have this gateway of a single service providers, I think we'll be destroying value here. So what I suggest is starting to think about a model where a single customer can face a multiplicity of service providers. And maybe that model is just net neutrality, although I do think that for a number of services, ownership of the network will bring in a level of trust and reliability that's much harder to provide over the internet. So I'm just going to go quickly on this, and you can note the wonderful photo of a walled garden. I think that if we're talking about net neutrality, there's a very simple way of defining it, and that is just to say a net neutral internet access is a guaranteed amount of customer to IX capacity dedicated to internet usage. Now, in the copper world, that's hard to do because you have a single logical stream delivering all services, and therefore, by definition, service provider services and internet are fighting for the capacity. In the fiber world, it's very easy to do because you have lambdas. You can dedicate a lambda to internet access, and bingo, you have net neutrality. And interestingly enough, that's what Verizon is doing today with Fios. You have one lambda for TV, one lambda for upstream, one lambda for downstream. So why not have one lambda for neutral internet? And that would also solve the problem of how much capacity am I actually buying, compared to the nominal. Well, this is what's dedicated to you all the way to the IX. This is what Hong Kong Broadband Network is doing in Hong Kong. And actually, they'll pay you your money back if they don't guarantee 80% of the capacity that they have, the nominal capacity they have sold you. So it's very possible to do this. How is this applicable to the US? Derek Slater of Google was kind enough to blog about this as well a few weeks back, and there was a response by a man I don't know called Scott Cleland, but apparently a lot of people here know him. And he did quite a long diatribe explaining why this was completely wrong. And his essential objection was the U.S. is not like the rest of the world. Now, as a Frenchman, I know all about cultural exceptionalism, and I can tell you that this is what gets you a really bad reputation internationally. So be careful with that argument. So his argument essentially was to say incumbents in the U.S. do not have a majority share, and that's the only country in the world where that's true. Sorry, BT has 38% market share in the UK, and there's a ton of examples of that. US is the only country where cable goes everywhere. Sorry, Netherlands 100%, Switzerland 100%, Belgium 100%. There's a lot of countries in the world where cable goes everywhere. US wireless competition is fiercer than elsewhere. 4 players, is that fiercer than elsewhere? I don't think so. So I don't think any of these arguments stand up. His second argument was to say, well, okay, let's assume you have to open a network. Why would it be the incumbent's network? Hey, that's a very good point. Why would it be the incumbent's network? I think if you're going to open the networks, you have to open every network. Symmetric regulation works. It's happening. TDC in Denmark is having to open its cable network. Opta has forced the Dutch cable operators to start opening their network. It's happening. Why would that be anathema? If you open the networks, every network has to be open. And his other point was to say there's a scale issue. If your market share is forced down by competitors on your network, you're going to reach scale issues. Well, I'm sorry, but I can't quite buy that argument when I see that Verizon's current network covers more homes than the country of Netherlands, and it seems to work for KPN. So I don't think that issue works as well. So my message to Scott Clown, and I hope he's listening, is just to say, work the economics and prove me wrong, and I'll be more than happy to blog about it and say I'm wrong. But I don't think any of these arguments wash. Okay, I'm not going to go into this. These are painful things for you anyway.
We've seen that.
Yeah, you've seen that. Okay, so in conclusion, very quickly, I believe, based on the research that I've done so far, that open access makes economic sense in a fiber world for all players. There are issues with being open access, especially when you're a municipal network, because then you have brand issues and notoriety issues. But it's not the economics that are an issue. It's how you sell services to the end customers. Vertically integrated next-generation access deployment will not happen with private money in a 3 to 5 year investment time frame. That's a fallacy. If anyone believes that, I want to see their model because I don't think that works. You have to design a profitable wholesale model for broadband. What I mean by this is the network has to pay for itself in a reasonable amount of time, which is probably 10 to 15 years, and that has to work independently of your service strategy. And then the service is the cherry on the top. And finally, I think looking into net neutrality in the NGA world is something that needs to be done. It's not the panacea, but it's something that's really interesting to consider. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Benoit. Now, go get set up. Did you bring, where's your case? Oh, there it is. Look. Okay. Get set up, but let me make a few public service announcements.
Can I use this one?
Yeah, sure. Is it on? Yeah, hey. All right. I'm standing between you, lunch, and some great music, but let me just say a few words. First, I'd like to once again thank our lead sponsor, Alcatel-Lucent. Is Neil Salzman here? He is out in the other room, making important phone calls to get Chattanooga online or something. I'd like to thank the Sunlight Foundation, the Millennium Communications Group, Google, Atlantic Online, and 37 Signals. Our marketing director, Isabel, reminded me of some of our collaborating partners who I have not mentioned, and my deepest apologies. EduCause helped us out quite a bit in getting the word out. Free Press helped us quite a bit in getting the word out. The Personal Democracy Forum, Micha, my humble apologies, Personal Democracy Forum helped us to get the word out. The Benton Foundation helped us to get the word out. Thank you, Charles. DSL Prime, Dave Burstein helped us to get the word out. So thanks to all of you and to our other collaborating partners. And, the Baller Daily Letter, Daily News Summary helped us get the word out. By the way, if you're not on Jim Baller's daily list of telecom headlines, boy, they do a really good job. And it's absolutely free and worth thousands of times the price. Let's see. I'm sure. So we're going to give away the 2 AutoNet mobile routers and a bunch of other cool stuff. You must be present to win. This will happen sometime late this afternoon. It's we also think that the program is worth staying for, but you also get to win some cool things if you stick around, and your name is drawn, and you are here. So I think I've taken more than enough time. So Benoit.
Can I just say thanks, David, for everything?
Oh, sure.
And no pressure, I'm very comfortable playing with these guys.
So Benoit Felton and his backup band, ladies and gentlemen.